What's good, everybody? It's your boy, the Kid, and we're back with another video. You know what we're here to talk about. If you don't know what we're here to talk about, you're crazy. I don't know. It says in the title. You know what time of year it is. If you're new to the channel, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Appreciate you guys for tuning in. If you're not new to the channel, you know exactly what we're here to talk about. And it's the Final Four. We got UConn versus South Carolina, which could be a national championship game. We got UConn. We got UCLA versus Texas, which could be a national championship game. And whichever the outcomes of those games are, is going to be a phenomenal national championship game, whether it's UConn, UCLA, whether it's UConn, Texas, whether it's South Carolina, UCLA, or South Carolina, Texas. It's going to be a phenomenal national championship game. And I think we can honestly say, if we're all being unbiased, you know, there's fans of Michigan and LSU and TCU and all these other teams. These are the four best teams in the country. They've been the four best teams all season. They've very seldomly, I think Texas fell out of the top four maybe once. But for the most part, South Carolina's been in the top three or top four. UCLA has been in the top four the entire time. They only had the one loss. And UConn has not lost. So, of course, they've been number one the whole season. So, I do think these are the four best teams. And I think this is the best way that they could have matched up, in my opinion. Before getting to a national championship game, considering South Carolina and Texas play multiple times a year. And we are not in a position to where we haven't seen South Carolina and UConn in a couple years. We haven't seen South Carolina, UCLA, all of these games, all of these teams have played in the last few years, except maybe UConn, Texas. I can't remember the last time UConn and Texas played. I think they might have played last year, but I could be wrong. But obviously, there's a lot to talk about with both of these games, with all four of these teams. We'll start with UConn and South Carolina. The keys to the matchup, we'll start with South Carolina side. The keys to South Carolina winning this game and going to a national championship is the defensive end. South Carolina has always been known as a team that hangs their hat on the defensive end. They play through the post and they rebound the ball well. They take care of the basketball. But this year they're more of a I don't want to say more of a scoring team because they still play really great defense. But this year it's not as much like, okay, they need to make sure they have this offensively coming into the game. I think their offense will be there. Although UConn is also another great defensive team, I think their offense will be there. I don't know if it's best offense of South Carolina versus best offense of Connecticut. I don't know if South Carolina can necessarily keep up, and that's not to say that they don't have weapons, because they definitely do. And I think them adding a Taniyah Latson, similar to how I said about UCLA adding a Gianna Neekins, I think adding a Taniyah Latson is huge for this game in specifically, because while there were issues last year that were more on the defensive end, I would say, in the UConn game in the national championship and the game in February that was in Columbia, I also think there was a problem of players not being able to create on their own. And Taniyah Latson can do that. We've seen her in the Elite Eight. We've seen her in the Sweet 16. We've seen her throughout the season start to find her footing, and obviously we've seen her before she got to South Carolina being a leading scorer in the country. So we know what she's capable of doing, and y'all know what I'm going to say. If you listen to these videos, if you see me talk about South Carolina, anytime I talk about South Carolina, it starts and ends with one player, and that's Raven Johnson. Raven Johnson is the biggest key to this game on either side, because the defense that she's most likely going to have to play on Azzi Fudd, and the aggressiveness that she's going to have to bring on the offensive end. You know, again, when I say aggressiveness, that doesn't mean come out and shoot 20 shots and do anything crazy. But she went 8 of 11, had 18 points, 3 assists against Oklahoma. She went 10 points, 8 rebounds, 6 assists on 4 of 12 shooting against TCU. I'm more than okay with her shooting 10 to 12 shots a game. More than okay, because she's super efficient. She shoots the three ball really well. So I'm not really worried about that. It's her staying aggressive, staying confident throughout the entire game. And if she's able to do that while also playing really good defense on Azzi Fudd, that gives South Carolina the best chance to win the Final Four. or at least in the game against UConn. Last year, at least in the second game, it wasn't, and I don't even think the first game that they played last year, I don't even think it was really Paige and AZ that went off. I think AZ started out slow and then had a good second quarter, if I'm not mistaken. But last time these teams played, the best player on the court was AZ Fudd. Second best player on the court was Sarah Strong. Both of those players are still in this game, and they're better than they were last year. And the underrated thing about both of them really is their defense. I think the underrated thing about UConn is because of how good their offense is, how talented they are on the offensive end. The defense gets thrown under the radar, and they don't play as heavy a talent or heavy as competition as South Carolina, Oklahoma, Texas, UCLA, LSU, Michigan. The list goes on. Iowa, Ohio State. The list goes on and on. But I will say, even when they've played those other really good teams throughout the season, they've, outside of the Michigan game, most of those games have still ended up being blowouts. They blew out Syracuse, who ended up being a tournament team who they played again. Sorry, I'm reading it backwards. Let's see, full schedule. I was reading that completely backwards. For some reason, they started the top of the schedule with the start of their, so now it starts. Okay, they beat Louisville, who was a team that made it to the Sweet 16, if I'm not mistaken. They might have lost in the round of 32, but I'm pretty sure they made it to the Sweet 16. Beat them by 13, first game of the season. They beat Florida State, who didn't turn out to be who we, which they lost tonight, last in them and Caleb Simpson, so it makes sense. They beat Ohio State early by 32, who was a team that was in the Sweet 16 as well. No, round of 32. Round of 32, because I think they lost to Notre Dame. Yeah, they lost to Notre Dame in the round of 32. Beat Michigan by 3. That was the close game. And then you have USC, who they beat by 28. You have Iowa, who they beat by 26. They have Notre Dame, who they blew out really twice. They blew out Tennessee by 30. So even in those games where you can say, okay, well, they've played upper competition, they held Louisville to 66 points. They held Florida State to 67. Michigan to 69. USC to 51. Iowa to 64. Notre Dame to 47. Tennessee to 66. And then you get to the tournament where Notre Dame was just held to 52. North Carolina was held to 42. Syracuse was held to 45. And again, that's where I think the defense is underrated, because their defense is a lot of times the catalyst of how good their offense can be and how potent that offense can be. And I don't even know if they've played their best offensive game as a unit in the tournament yet, which is kind of scary. Because yes, AZ Fudd had a game where she had 34 against Syracuse, but Sarah Strong wasn't phenomenal, at least scoring-wise, in that game. And they only scored 63 points against North Carolina, and they only scored 70 against, and it sounds crazy saying only 70, but they only scored 70 against Notre Dame, which AZ Fudd didn't have a phenomenal game. Sarah Strong started out slow. Blanca Quinones was really the player that got them going. So there is going to be a game, potentially, unless they just, don't have one of those games. But most likely, there is going to be a game where most of their team shoots the ball really well, plays really well, and it's one of those offensive games that you just don't quite have an answer for. Now, I will say, if there's any team that I feel is equipped to stop that defensively, maybe you could throw Texas in there, but I would say South Carolina is probably the one, because they've played each other so many times. But I will say, in the last couple of matchups, we haven't really seen, maybe it was personnel, look, we haven't really seen South Carolina be able to do that. So that's what I'm curious about with both of these teams, and the game that's going to happen on Friday is South Carolina, are they capable of slowing down UConn's offense? Which I don't think they're not capable of it. We haven't seen it in the last 2 times we've played. So we have to go based off of what we've seen. For AZ, you cannot start out the way that she did in a couple of these games in the tournament. She didn't like the way she played in the first round. She didn't really like how she played against North Carolina or Notre Dame. But of course, we loved how she played against Syracuse. So if you save your best 2 games of the season for the Final Four in the national championship, so be it. You know what I mean? But you have to have those games. These ones, like, these are the most important games. South Carolina is, I would say, better than they were last. I don't want to say better, but they're more equipped to handle UConn's offense than they were last year, in terms of what they can do offensively as well. Because you have Joyce Edwards, you have Agat McKeer, you have Tanai Latson, you have Tessa Johnson, you have Raven Johnson, you have Medina Okot. There's so many different options that they also have on the offensive end that it's really going to come down to whose defensive game plan and strategy works the best. Now, we have UCLA in Texas, which is a rematch from early in the season, and I don't think this game was like super close. I think Texas kind of shut them down in a way. I don't say in a way, but I think it was tough for UCLA to really get to what they wanted to get to, if I'm remembering correctly. It wasn't a blowout, but it wasn't necessarily super close either. Texas was 20-10 in the first quarter, 25-15 in the second quarter, and then UCLA was 22-17 in the third, and then 18-14 in the fourth. So for UCLA, the most important thing for them is their defense. I know I just said it about South Carolina, but the most important thing for UCLA is their defense in handling the pressure of Texas. If they can handle Texas's pressure, I think this game, I don't want to say this game is in UCLA's hands, but I do think UCLA is the more talented team. But if Texas is there and they're playing harder and they're diving on every loose ball and they're getting to, every extra possession or things like that, which they typically do, it's going to be really hard for UCLA to keep up with that if they're not also making shots on the other end. So in the first game, Lauren Betts went 4 of 8, only 8 points, three fouls, 7 rebounds, 1 block. Gianna Neekins went 17 points, 7 of 11, 3 of 6 from 3. Gabriella Jaquez only had 4 points on 4 shots. Charlize Ledger Walker had 13 points on 5 of 10 shooting. And then Kiki Rice went 4 of 12 and had 17 points and went to the free throw line 10 times. They only played 6 players in this game. UCLA did. Angela Dugalich played 34 minutes, had 6 points, 2 of 6 shooting. And then for the Texas end of it, they only played 7. They played Brea Cunningham, 29 minutes. She had 7 points. They had Madison Booker, of course, had 16 points on 17 shots. Taya Sidbury played 23 minutes. She had 2 points on 2 shots. Jordan Lee played 39 minutes, had 13 points on 16 shots. Rory Harmon had 26 points, was the best player on the floor. 9 of 15 shooting, 2 of 2 from 3, 5 assists, and only 1 turnover. And then Justice Carlson and Kyla Odaker both played off the bench, 30 combined minutes. Justice Carlson had 10 points and 6 rebounds off the bench. So, rebounding is going to be important. Dealing with the physicality, dealing with the energy and the intensity and the effort that Texas is going to play with is big for UCLA. And then for Texas, you have to pick your poison. Are you allowing Lauren Best to play one-on-one and trusting that Brea Cunningham, Kyla Odaker, or Justice Carlson can do what they do, or can, contain her even a little bit? Or are you going to send doubles? Or are you going to try to confuse her and try to throw different things out there, kind of the way Minnesota did early on, kind of the way Duke did early on? Obviously, UCLA ended up figuring both of those out, but I still don't know what the best case of defense is against this UCLA team, because with the amount of shooting that they have on the outside of Charlize Ledger Walker, almost everyone that plays besides Lauren Betts can shoot the ball at a high level from the 3-point line. And Charlize Ledger Walker is capable of making the 3, but that's the player that you would leave. That's the player that you would double off of and try to recover to. Kiki Rice has to be poised. She has to be aggressive, but in a good way. She has to be a composed aggressive, because she can be the reason that they win this game, but she can also be the reason that they lose this game. And I'm not saying that in a way of that she's a bad player or anything like that, but there were plays in the Duke game where they were starting to make their comeback, and she made a few plays that were phenomenal, and she made a few plays that was like, you got to slow down, you got to take your time. And I think figuring out that balance, especially in a game like this, where Texas is going to pressure you, Texas is going to send a press, they're going to try to guard you 94 feet and try to make the game ugly, at least on your half of the offensive end. I think you have to be smart and you have to make good decisions, because once you get to that half court, I do think there's a lot of times where UCLA, and there's a lot of games where UCLA is going to have the advantage in terms of how much talent they have on the offensive side. So, for Texas, I think Rory Harmon once again has to be aggressive, attack those perimeter defenders for UCLA, attack in drop coverage. We just saw Lauren Betts struggle in drop coverage against Tiana Mayer. Tiana Mayer hit so many mid-range jumpers early in the game and in the first half because they were playing drop coverage. If they continue to do that, which they probably will, because Rory Harmon is not known to be a great jump shooter, they probably will do that. And I'm also wanting to see how they're going to guard Madison Booker and Jordan Lee off those pin downs and off those cross screens that they set, especially on the baseline, because Madison Booker gets a lot of baseline screens and gets, I don't want to say wide open jumpers, but a lot of times she gets wide open jumpers unless it's against teams that have played them multiple times over the last couple of years, like in South Carolina or even LSU. And then those shots are a little tougher, and I would assume that they would be in this case because they played earlier this season. Those are the two players that obviously for Texas that you need to step up. But I'm looking at Jordan Lee, I'm looking at Justice Carlton, and I do think this is a game where Aaliyah Crump can play and have a real effect on the outcome, because there's a chance that this game is like one of those where there's a chance that UCLA is shooting the ball really well and Texas is gonna have to match it. If you want to match that, you have to put your best offensive weapons out there as well, and Aaliyah Crump is one of their 5 best offensive weapons on this team, in my opinion. You would play Rory Harmon because she's your point guard. You would play Jordan Lee because she's your best shooter. You would play Madison Booker because she's your best scorer. And then you would probably play, if you're going for scoring and like versatility, I would go Justice Carlton and Aaliyah Crump. If you're going for, scoring and shooting all around, like a Kyla Odaker, I wouldn't be mad at that as well, because she is also a physical presence that can get to the free throw line, get offensive rebounds and things like that. So I do think there might be a chance that Aaliyah Crump becomes a big piece in this game. But I also know that Vic Schaefer is very close to the cards and the players that he plays and why he's playing them. He's going to play certain players strictly for defensive purposes, strictly for your guarding this player and things like that. I think this game will come down to coaching, game plan, strategy, and shot making. Coaching, game plan, shot making. Those are the 3 things that I'm looking for in this game, because Vic Schaefer, one of the greatest coaches that we've seen in the last 10 to 15, 20 years. Corey Close is on her, I don't want to say on her way to being that, because she's done her part. She's done a phenomenal job at UCLA. She's done a great job with USA basketball. But there is a narrative around her that she's not phenomenal in these situations and in these settings. And there's no better time, there's no better place than to silence the doubters than in the Final Four to get to a national championship for the first time. I don't want to say in their program, because I think no, this would be their first time in their program, because I think this was their first Final Four, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm definitely looking at, like I said, the coaching, the game plan, which team is able to implement their game plan and get into the most. I think UCLA will probably want to try to get up and down a little bit, but you don't want to be too frantic and make mistakes. And I think Texas is going to slow it down offensively, but also try to speed them up defensively, so that the game has to slow down once they the game has to speed up once they get to the half court. I'm still sticking with the 2 choices, the 2 picks that I had in the preseason and that I had coming into the tournament, and UCLA winning and UConn winning. I could be completely wrong. This could literally go Texas versus South Carolina. It could be Texas versus UConn. It could be South Carolina versus UCLA. I genuinely think any four of these teams could win and could be the national championship this year, or could be the national champion this year. I think these are the four best teams in the country. I think UConn and UCLA have been the most talented and the most balanced teams all season long, and I think the collision course has been set for a while. But just because a collision course is set doesn't mean that's going to happen. Because we've seen plenty of times where we were supposed to see certain matchups, or we thought we were going to see certain teams and certain players meet up in certain situations, and it just didn't happen. So this isn't me guaranteeing that South Carolina or Texas or UCLA or UConn win. This is just my opinion based off what I've seen this season and what I believe that all of these teams are capable of. If you disagree, you disagree. Let me know in the comments who you think is going to be in the national championship. I know there's going to be a lot of South Carolina fans. There's going to be some UCLA fans. There's going to be some UConn fans. There's going to be some Texas fans. But if there's any I don't want to say non-biased, but if there's any fans that are not fans of those four, I would like to know who you think is going to win the Final Four based off of what you've seen, based off of what you believe. Who do you think is the most well-equipped? Who do you think is the best coached? Who brings the best game plans? Who has the best players? Sometimes it just comes down to who has the best players on the court. We'll see. I appreciate you guys for watching. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. Tap in with the next one, and we'll see you guys soon.